Today we have Beth Gibson. She's a clinical lecturer in the Occupational Therapy Department, College of Public Health and Health Professions at the University of Florida. She is the manager of the UF Smart Driver Rehab Program, which provides driver rehabilitation services to the community. Beth is a licensed and registered occupational therapist, certified driver rehabilitation specialist, and driving instructor. She completed her bachelor's in occupational therapy at the University of New Hampshire. She has worked in driver rehabilitation for over 25 years, providing comprehensive driver evaluations and trainings to clients across the age spectrum, with an emphasis on low and high tech equipment. And with her is Sing Woo Hwangbo. He goes by Benedict, and he has a Doctor of Occupational Therapy degree from the University of Southern California. He is a PhD student and graduate student in the Department of Occupational Therapy at the University of Florida College of Public Health and Health Professions in Gainesville. Thank you both for joining us today.
Nice to be here. Thanks for asking him.
It's nice meeting you all. Thank you so much.
And we can go ahead and get started. Beth is going to share her screen first. Perfect.
Okay. Well, I just realized after Eden told me to look over the bio ed center that my title has changed since I wrote that bio, that I'm now an instructional assistant professor, but other than that, everything's the same. So I'm going to jump into my objectives. So what I want to talk about are the features of Parkinson's disease and how they may impact Parkinson's disease. Obviously, we know, those of you that have Parkinson's and other movement disorders, there's a bit of a spectrum. Not everybody has the same symptoms. Not everybody has the same symptoms to the same degree. So understand that I'm kind of talking generally about the symptoms that may be present, but focusing really on what the risk factors are. We're also going to touch on how some autonomous vehicle technology can mitigate driving errors and potentially enhance fitness to drive, which is a study that we did here at UF last year, and also to talk about some intervention strategies. So, first we're going to start with how Parkinson's symptoms and medications may affect driving. So, I'm sure you all are as familiar, if not more familiar than I am with the symptoms of Parkinson's, but what I want to just hit on are the aspects of those symptoms that can affect the ability to drive. So with bradykinesia, we know that slowness of movement. So again, when you're thinking about driving, there are times when we have to move quickly. So if you're having a slowness of moving, if you're having some freezing or some hesitation in your movement, that may affect the fluidity of how you're turning the wheel, the speed at which you're moving your foot. So things like that. The rigidity that some people experience, that again can affect the smoothness of your motions. And therefore, if you think about turning the steering wheel or applying the gas and brake, if you're having issues with rigidity, that may affect how smoothly you're doing those things. Also think about the fact that if it's affecting your neck, it may affect your ability to check traffic quickly or to, quickly glance into a blind spot, something like that. With postural instability, obviously, we're seated when we drive, so we're not worried about necessarily falling over when we drive, but you have to get out to your car in the first place. So if you're having any issues with balance, as you're opening the door of the car, as you're getting in and out of the car, might there be any additional risk of fall? Also, you want to think about the potential for kyphosis. Some people with Parkinson's develop that posture where the shoulders are very rounded and the head is very far forward. And if you put yourself in that position, what you realize is as you try to turn your head to look, let's say, at your mirrors, you can't turn as much. When I'm sitting up straight, I can turn my chin almost over to each shoulder. If I put myself more in that posture, I turn my head, I'm turning it about half as much. So just the fact that your posture has changed in that way may affect your ability to check traffic and check your mirrors. Some people do experience psychiatric symptoms. So depression in and of itself can affect reaction time. Anxiety obviously can affect a person's comfort level being out in traffic, dealing with people. We can also have hallucinations. And one of the things that's true of hallucinations with people with Parkinson's is that the visual hallucinations can be very well formed and very vivid. So in some situations with some diagnosis, somebody might see, a blurriness or, have a sense of something moved, but they're not really seeing something. One of the local movement disorder neurologists here lectured to one of my classes last year about driving and Parkinson's. And one of the things she was talking about is that she has had reports from her clients where they will literally like see a child in the road or see an animal in the road, and they may swerve to miss it even though there's nothing there. So it's not just a sense of a movement or something being there. They can actually see something that appears to be real. So again, if that's a symptom that you have, that's something to talk to your doctor about, because it could affect your driving. If you're swerving to avoid something that doesn't exist, if I'm swerving to avoid something in the road and other cars around me see that thing, they're expecting me to swerve. If I'm swerving to avoid nothing because it's in my head but not in the rest of the world, they're not going to be ready for that. Another issue can be delusions. And so there can be paranoid delusions where sometimes people think that the car behind them is following them. They may have ideas that are inaccurate about the behaviors of people around them. So this is important if you have these symptoms. There can be cognitive changes. So, in many cases, there is mild cognitive impairment. And so, depending on how mild it is, it may have no effect upon your driving, or it may affect your memory, your ability to remember where you're going, remember directions, things like that. In some cases, it's significant enough that it moves into the range of dementia. As we're starting to get to that point, again, that's a time when you probably want to be discussing driving with your doctor and possibly seeing a driving specialist, because we want to make sure that your processing speed, that your memory, that your attention, that all these aspects of cognition that you need to drive are good enough that it's not a problem. Impulsivity can be a symptom. Sometimes it's a side effect of medications. And, if you imagine someone who's impulsive behind the wheel, maybe they cut in front of other traffic, maybe they pull out because they get impatient. So they may make rash decisions that they shouldn't make. So if you're seeing impulsivity in different areas, it could also affect driving. Now there's sleep abnormalities. Obviously, again, you don't want to be asleep while you're driving, but being a drowsy driver can be very dangerous. So whether you're a drowsy driver because you stayed up too late last night, or you just generally don't get enough sleep for whatever reason, that can affect your ability to keep your attention on the road. Whether you've got Parkinson's or anything else, if you're a drowsy driver, really they've been equated in a lot of studies being as dangerous as a driver who's drunk. So if you're having a lot of sleep issues that making you sleepy during the day as a result, that can be a big problem. Sleep attacks are another big thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But sleep attacks typically are more a medication side effect symptom. So I'll be talking about that in a minute. Now, among the sort of non-motor features, autonomic dysfunction. So orthostatic hypotension is sort of this feeling of dizziness. Now, a lot of times we associate it with getting up too suddenly. You either get out of bed, sit up out of bed, or you stand up quickly and maybe you feel a little dizzy. But it can be a Parkinson's side effect even when a person is seated. So again, if this is a symptom that you're experiencing, again, imagine that you're dizzy when you're driving. If you get that dizziness, the car is passing you, going the other way, going past you in your peripheral vision, that can throw off your ability to stay in your lane if you're experiencing dizziness. So again, if that's a symptom you're having, something to discuss with your doctor. And then, fatigue and pain syndrome. Pain, obviously fatigue, just like being drowsy, can take away your ability to keep your attention where you need it to be. And pain can take the focus of your attention off your driving and, distract you because of the pain. So when we talk about meds, most people are familiar with the idea of having some meds, particularly some of the dopamine meds where you have an on and off state, right? When your medication is acting, you're in the on state, your symptoms are as well controlled as they are. And then as your medications wear off and you get closer to when you need that next dose, you start going into your off state where your symptoms maybe become more pronounced. And then you take your next dose of medication and you're back onto your on state. Now, not everybody experiences significant on and off states, but if you are somebody who does, making sure that you're thinking about that around your driving. So if I'm going to be out for several hours, when is my next dose of medication due? Am I going to need it during the time I'm out? Is my medication going to be wearing off as I'm driving home and I don't have another dose with me and my symptoms are going to be increasing as I drive home? So keeping that in mind, if you're somebody that has significant on-off states, making sure you always have, some backup pills with you, things like that, so that you don't end up where your symptoms are getting worse. Sometimes when I'm doing an evaluation with somebody, I'll tell them, look, if you're telling me that your medication is going to start wearing off like halfway through our drive, that's fine. We need to stop and you take it and we wait till it kicks in. That's okay. What I don't want is your symptoms start increasing, you don't have meds with you, and now you're performing worse and worse and worse. And I have to tell you that you're not safe because you didn't think about this. So it's really important. If you're taking the MAOB inhibitors, that can increase the risk of hallucinations. So I already talked about, some of the dangers of that. This was a big one that I was unaware of until the neurologist spoke to my class, the dopamine agonists. So that one can cause a sleep attack. So what she literally described in her lecture to us was sometimes patients that, could be eating dinner and face plant in their dinner, or be behind the wheel and fall sound asleep whilst driving down the road. Obviously, that would not be a good thing, right? That's going to be dangerous. I've listed 3 of the most common medications that fall in this class. Now, sleep attacks are a side effect. When you listen to the, medication commercials and stuff on TV and they list a million side effects, including death for just about everything that you can take. So we know not everybody experiences every side effect. So I'm not suggesting if you're taking these, oh my gosh, you got to stop driving. But if you are somebody who is experiencing sleep attacks as a side effect of these medications, absolutely, you need again to be having a conversation with your doctor, because if that should happen while you're behind the wheel, that could easily result in an accident. So when you speak with your neurologist, you need to talk to them about, do you ever suddenly fall asleep? Do you have hallucinations? What type of hallucinations? Do you have any delusions? Have there been an increase in impulsivity? Do you get dizzy while seated? Do your family and friends feel safe driving with you? I do encourage everybody. A lot of times when I see people, they'll say, well, a spouse will say, well, I don't drive with him anymore. Well, okay, so he's still driving, but you don't drive with him and you don't let your kids don't drive with him and, nobody trusts him, but you're fine with them out there driving. So, it is important to have somebody in your life that you can get to ride with you periodically to give you honest feedback, to let you know, have they seen changes in your driving? I'm not saying it will happen to everybody, but it's not uncommon. And so most people, we've done studies, people are poor judges of their own abilities. That was, as we did studies looking at, the opinion of a driving specialist, the opinion of the person, and the opinion of, a caregiver or family member, the person was the least accurate, and their opinion came farthest from what the professional felt. So it really is important to have somebody in your life who can give you some feedback about how you're doing. So I'm going to talk about some of the studies, so you just know, scientifically where some of this is coming from. In studies that have been done, we found that people with Parkinson's make more errors compared to controls, so people without Parkinson's, in a driving simulator. They also had a significantly greater number of crashes. So when we set up the simulator to allow for crashes, they had more crashes. They were more likely to fail on-road tests compared to the control group. And the most predictive situations were if they had difficulty turning left at intersections, difficulty staying in their lane at low speeds, and difficulty adapting their speeds to higher speeds. So let's say driving on the interstate or driving on roads where maybe the speed is more like 55. So if you're having trouble with these things, those were better indicators that someone might fail a test. Now, so these were also some of the other errors that were found in studies, that people with Parkinson's made significantly more errors than a control group, changing lanes, staying in their lane, monitoring their blind spots, backing up, parking, and at traffic light controlled intersections. So those are the most common types of errors. Now, the good news was that people with Parkinson's were better about self-regulation. So, what I mean by that is a person who realizes, for example, okay, you know what? I don't see as well at night anymore. Maybe I'm going to cut down. I'm not going to be driving at night. So people with Parkinson's were found to have more restrictive driving patterns than other people of their age and gender. So, we matched groups up. They drove less overall. They tended to stay a little closer to home. They drove less often at night. They drove less often on days with bad weather. And they tended to adjust their route by avoiding high-speed roads. Now, sometimes just simply older drivers do this, but this was found, even when we matched people by age and gender, the people with Parkinson's did restrict by their own choice, they're driving more, which, typically is a sign of good decision-making and good insight. Now, the study that we did last year was called Driving Performance of People with Parkinson's Using Autonomous Vehicle Technologies, which I always had to read because it's such a mouthful. So based on the idea that people with Parkinson's made more driving errors, what we wanted to look at was, would any of the features, the newer features in vehicles, be helpful in decreasing those errors? So the systems we were looking at are things that were either what's called ADAS, which is Advanced Driver Assistance System. So if you think about in these newer cars, an ADAS feature is something that would help with steering or braking. So if you've got a system in your car that keeps you in your lane, that actually turns your steering wheel a little bit and keeps you in your lane, or something that would actually hit the brakes for you if you were going to hit somebody, or even what we call adaptive cruise control that speeds up and slows down and maintains your distance between cars. And then we have the in-vehicle information systems, which just give you information. So that could be as simple as your backup camera that's showing you what's behind you, or something that beeps at you, but it's so if you've got, say, a backup sensor that beeps when something's coming, but it doesn't necessarily hit the brakes. It's just giving you information. So in the study, what we did is we had people with Parkinson's and we drove the same route twice with each person. And we drove it with adaptive cruise control turned on the interstate. We drove it with the lane maintenance feature on, and we drove it with the blind spot monitors on so that you would get an alert if someone was in your blind spot. Now, the little bits of video I'm going to show you, this was of the 112 people that we drove with, this guy was the worst. And I was lucky enough to be the person that got to ride with him, which made my colleagues very happy that they didn't draw the short straw. What I want you to try to notice now, we had cameras, we had instruments all over the vehicle. So we had cameras on the side mirrors, we had cameras looking out the front of the vehicle, which is the view you're about to see. And I'm going to show you a couple of views. But the big thing I want you to notice, because you really can't see like speed control and so forth all that well in this, but you can see how well he stays in his lane. And most people, typically maybe made 8 or 9 errors in their lane position. This guy had like 70. So, I mean, he was significantly worse than anybody else. So just try to notice, here we are we are not supposed to be getting off at this exit, but you will notice that it almost looks like we're getting off at that exit because we're just not staying in our lane. And as we're going here along the road, we're sort of getting onto the shoulder a bit and, and then we're sort of back in our lane. Now, sometimes I think it was maybe because a car was coming up alongside, he'd start to drift back out of the lane a little over onto the shoulder, and then we'd kind of move over again. And so we were constantly going out of our lane and drifting. And on the interstate, at least, it was mostly off to the right. So that wasn't quite so bad. So let me stop this one and move on. So, nope, come on. Now this is on a a surface street. So this is a road that's got a speed limit of 45. Again, we've got a bike lane alongside of us, so you want to notice how often we visited the bike lane. So, as we're going along, we're like, now over into our bike lane. And, he's trying to stay in his lane. It's not like he's not trying. But, very frequently we would just start moving over there into the bike lane again, and then we're back. I was kind of running out of spaces to mark the mistakes on my little data form. So, you can see that he's having a very hard time just staying in, within his lane, not even the center of his lane, but just in the lane because of some of his symptoms. And then, now this one's gonna make you feel like you're crazy because this is the camera that's on the side mirror and it only takes pictures like every half a second. So this is gonna feel like it's really, really going fast. And you'll notice that I'm looking at the left side mirror. So the previous ones I showed you kind of give you more of an idea of how things look to the right. So what I want you to think about for the segment that I show you is, watch this side mirror. Think about the fact that your side mirror should be in your lane, right? It shouldn't really be going over the lane line on the left. And and if you're staying centered, it's going to stay about the same distance from the lane line. So just watch how much variation there is in where this mirror is compared to the lines on the road. And then like I said, it feels like whoa, but obviously we're not driving super fast. It's just really short pictures. But you can see that we're all over the place. And we are not in any way, shape, or form staying where we need to be. So, that's before everybody gets nauseous. So that was a real big problem. So, these features that we felt, I'm going to show you some short little videos that talk about the features that we looked at. So
blind spot monitoring helps you see what's in your blind
can you
spot.
hear what's
The blind spot
on my
monitoring feature.
okay. So My Car Does What is a great website to look at. And if you've got a newer car and you're thinking, I don't know all the things this car does, that's a great place to go look. So we really like this one. This is about the lane departure. And again, these are all real short. And then the final one has to do with the adaptive cruise control. So in our results, what we found, definitely the feature that made the biggest difference really was the adaptive cruise control, because what we found on the interstate when we drove with the folks with Parkinson's, we drove with it turned on, we then turned around and drove with it turned off, and they had a much harder time maintaining their speed within like a 5-mile-an-hour range of what the speed limit was. So we just found that a lot of times people's speed would just slowly drift down as we were going along. So being able to use a feature like this was very helpful. The study didn't necessarily show as much effect as we thought it would for the lane departure warnings. But I also feel like one of the limitations with the study is we were not looking at people with severe symptoms. We were looking at people with fairly mild physical symptoms. So it, a lot of them were just good drivers and they didn't have a problem. So it wasn't so much that it didn't help as they weren't really having many problems. So there wasn't a problem to fix. So I think, somebody like the fellow I showed you in the video that really couldn't stay in his lane, that person benefits a lot more than somebody who's really still doing fine and it didn't really make a difference, one way or the other. But these things were shown to reduce the total number of errors made by drivers with Parkinson's over the whole drive. As I say, the adaptive cruise control helped a lot with underspeeding, which was one of the biggest errors we saw. And, we think that the lane departure and so forth is beneficial. It's going to help some people a bit more than others. So when you're considering those technologies, you do want to understand under which circumstances they work best and what the limitations are and what your needs are. So, if you're someone that's mostly driving on residential roads that are more like 25 to 30 miles an hour, a lot of these features don't work at those slower speeds. So it really is important that, if you're thinking about purchasing a newer vehicle and looking to see if some of these things will help you, you want to really think about, well, what's my normal driving environment? Are these things going to work for me? Also remember that under certain circumstances, these things turn off. The first time I drove my new car for a long weekend, I'm like, this is great. It has the adaptive cruise control. It has all these things. And we're driving in pouring rain and it's like, I'm done, and it turned off. It's like, because it's using cameras. And if there's too much, the rain is really terrible, which it was really terrible, the cameras can't see either. And so, under certain circumstances, some of these features aren't going to help you because they don't work either. So if you've got significant fog, if you've got significant rain, some of these things may stop working. If you drive somewhere with a lot of snow and the lane lines get covered by the snow, it's not going to know if you're in your lane because it can't see the lane lines. Or if you live somewhere where the roads don't get painted very often. So it really is important. Also, you need to know things like, do you have to turn these features on every time you drive? Some cars you can set everything the way you want it and it stays that way till you change it. But some features you may have to choose to turn on. So you want to understand those things about your vehicle. The consensus for drivers with Parkinson's is, the driving may be maintained, especially early in the diagnosis. Sometimes, obviously you want to work closely with your neurologist on your treatment, getting assessed annually. You want to think about using some of these technologies that might be able to help. You want to consider whether you get an actual driving evaluation from a driving specialist where they can tell you how you're currently doing and make recommendations if you're having some challenges. Also, you want to start having a plan for when the time comes that I won't be able to drive, because typically that's going to happen for all of us, whether we have a progressive disease or not. There'll come a time when most of us are going to not be able to drive any longer. So having a plan early for how you would get around should that happen, whether it's a short-term thing for an illness or an injury or a longer-term thing because your skills have deteriorated due to your diagnosis, you want to have a plan in place so that you know what you're able to do and you're not trying to make that plan after you're less mobile. You've tried it out beforehand. So, I'll give some of the acknowledgements in a minute, but are there any questions?
One question, well, my obvious question is, did you correct the gentleman at all, or you just kind of sat there holding onto your hat and praying? Because I have to know.
Yeah, no, I mean, the job was to sit there and make little tick marks like, yep, over the line, over the line, over the line. So, no, not really. I mean, had it been a dangerous situation where he was gonna sideswipe somebody or pick out a cyclist, obviously I would have intervened. I did have a brake on my side. I could have stopped him. I could have also grabbed the steering wheel, but no, we just drove down the road like this for 45 minutes. So yeah.
And then someone asked, was there any correlation between age and performance?
We did not see a significant difference with age. And quite honestly, in general, when I talk to groups about driving, your physical abilities and your cognitive abilities and also any vision issues are a much better predictor of whether you're gonna have trouble than age. I have 90-year-olds that are great and 50-year-olds that are terrible. It's what your deficits are. So in and of itself, age is not a good predictor of whether someone's fitness starts to fall off.
And then is there a concrete way to measure reaction time? I mean, so that it's not just an opinion, it's a little bit more data-based, or?
Yeah, I mean, if you're seeing a therapist, sometimes people will have it in just a regular therapy clinic, or if you're seeing a driving specialist, like I can put someone on a simulator, or, I may have some therapists have a freestanding brake reaction tester. And so we can get an actual number and say, okay, your brake reaction time is, 0.57. I mean, we can get a concrete number, and we know from other studies, okay, the average brake reaction time of a male between the ages of this and this is X. So, I mean, we can concretely measure that. The tough thing that we want to remember in the real world is, when you're setting up a reaction time test and doing that, it's a very artificial situation. The person knows they're being tested. They know, this light's going to come on. When the light comes on, hit the brake. Well, in the real world, you don't know when something might happen. So part of your reaction time in the real world is noticing the thing that's like, oh crud, that just happened, I gotta stop. You have to see it, you have to make sense of it, you have to realize that your response should be slam on your brakes, and then you gotta slam on your brakes. So there's a lot of pieces that go into it. So it's not as simple as just, can I move my foot fast enough? Obviously, if I can't, there's a problem by itself. But it's also, did I scan my environment well enough to notice things? Did I make sense of it? Did I make my decision fast enough? So there's a lot of pieces to it where it gets harder to measure that precisely, because you have to make it fairly artificial to be able to concretely measure it.
And then is there a time specifically, or just general, when does rehab start to enter the picture, where you're like, before you maybe lose, we need to work on some skills?
So, number one, if anybody's starting to have any safety concerns, I saw a lady recently where, just her coordination between her two hands was getting more difficult. And all we did was add a steering knob, which is a very simple device, to the wheel, but that smoothed out her turns beautifully. So it was something very simple. But I think if we hadn't tested her and made that recommendation, her turns were very awkward. She was getting very uncomfortable with her driving. So sometimes there's little things we can do that then can, extend the person's ability to drive for much longer. Sometimes physicians will send people to us shortly after they've been diagnosed to just kind of get a baseline. How are they doing now? And then if they have changes in their symptoms, they may send them back. Are these changes enough that their performance has changed a lot? Sometimes people only come to see us once they've really started to have a lot of trouble. And at that point, there may or may not be something we can do about it, other than to say, yeah, it really is bad enough, or okay, you should still be safe doing these limited things.
And then we did one question. Can you repeat, what are the test units called? You called it something. I mean, my first thought was just driving simulator. Did you actually use a specific name?
I didn't use a specific name. I mean, if you're talking about reaction time, we look at reaction time in, portions of a second. So, typically a good brake reaction time is going to be somewhere around half a second. So it's really a very short amount of time.
And how can you find a certified driving inspection professional?
So, and I'll after I sign off, I'll put it in the chat, but the Association of Driver Rehabilitation Specialists, which the acronym isn't going to make any sense to you, but it's called ADED, ADED. I'll put in the chat the link to the website, and you can go there and look for providers and find providers across the country and also into Canada. And that's a good way to find qualified people.
And then someone asked, what again was the steering wheel tool you said smoothed out her steering? And is this something like somebody could just buy, or they get through an occupational therapist?
So what I was mentioning for that person was a steering knob. So, sometimes if you think about, just the knobs that maybe in the 50s people had on their steering wheels, sometimes truck drivers have things like that. The concern I have when people just try to get something on their own sometimes is a lot of the ones that you can get, like if you just go to an automotive store or something, aren't very sturdy. And so if you're somebody that really needs it and you're in the middle of a turn and it moves on you, that can create a different problem. Because the ones that are, sold in the store are just sort of like for fun. Whereas the ones that we recommend if someone really needs equipment are, they're crash tested, so they're not going to mess up your airbag. They're, installed in such a way that they're not going to move. They're very sturdy. They have a very wide base. And so they're not going to move on the wheel. They're also typically quick release. So when someone else is driving, you can get it out of their way. So it is wise to look at this with a professional, because even just getting the hang of how to use it, when you don't use it correctly, you can mess yourself up. So even though it's not a complex piece of equipment, it's a good idea to look at it with a therapist to make sure you understand how to use it. Some people catch on in 2 seconds, but then there's other people where, trust me, we're driving for quite a while going, put your hand back on the knob, take your hand off the knob, put your hand back on the knob. So, we have a lot of instruction with some people to just get them comfortable with it.
Well, thank you. And
All right,
I don't want to run out of time before we get Benedict, so I'm going to hold any other questions and give Benedict.
And I'm just going to run by, these are just some of the names of people that were involved in the research and the funding source for that research we did, and our engineers that did that, and the doctors that worked with us, and the people that were on our board. So let me end that. So, and I will put in the chat that website.
All right, so it seems like I can now take it over. And let me share my screen. And I hope everyone can see the screen. Correct? Okay, great. Okay, so hello everyone. It is my pleasure and honor to present today, and I'll be talking about the future of autonomous vehicle technologies. I mean, future, we never know how the future would be, but I'm just giving my best to share based on the studies that we did, and just like some of the general thoughts and reflections. And as always, topic like this will never have enough time to share everything. So, but however, I would like to briefly share some of our study findings and share some thoughts and reflections on autonomous vehicle technologies. So let's get going. So my Korean name is Sunwoo, but people here just call me Benedict. And so I am an occupational therapist from South Korea before coming to the States, and I've been back to back at school, doing my master's, doing my clinical doctorate, and then finally now doing my research, so doing my PhD. So it's been a long journey so far. This would be hopefully my last year. So I successfully defended my proposal, and my recent research has been the understanding drivers' perceptions, including individuals across the lifespan with and without disabilities, and veterans, towards autonomous vehicles. And I have also studied some of the motion and simulator sickness in autonomous vehicle technology. And the accomplishments so far, I've been fortunately been able to make 14 publications and 26 poster and oral presentations. And so I would quickly want to acknowledge our funding agency, our research team, and all of our stakeholders. And so now let me ask you all, who still finds themselves hand washing clothes in this era of convenience? Yeah, maybe. I see somebody shake, not saying like I'm not using it. Yeah. So fast forward to today, where innovation has gifted us time-saving marvel. I assume that most of us use the washing machine now. A simple push of a button, and the chore is taken care of effortlessly. And so now let's shift our focus to another innovation, transportation. So wouldn't it be cool if there's a vehicle that drives itself, allowing you to relax, catch up on your favorite podcast, or even like enjoy the scenery without worrying about the road ahead? So yes, I mean, absolutely. I would be very excited if the, autonomous vehicles become a reality. But then I want to ask, what do we know about autonomous vehicles? Like, anybody here is, familiar with autonomous vehicles and the technologies? Maybe or not. Some, I see some people raising their hands, but I don't know how many, but so let me explain briefly about the levels of automation. And according to the levels of automation from the Society of Automotive Engineers International, there are 6 levels. And so level 0 is obviously no automation. So human driver is fully responsible for controlling, operating the vehicle. Level 1 is, I would say, assisted driving. The vehicle can assist either steering or accelerating, decelerating the vehicle, but not both, like simultaneously. Level 2, I would call it partial automation. The vehicle can control both steering and accelerating and decelerating simultaneously under certain conditions. And level 3, which is conditional self-driving, the vehicle can perform driving under specific conditions without human driver intervention. But here's the important part. Driver need to always be ready to take over the control. Remember that. Level 4 is highly autonomous, and the vehicle can handle most of the driving tasks without human driver intervention in specific scenarios or environments. And so driver may not need to be ready to take over in certain conditions. And so level 5, which is like fully autonomous, would be like fully operating without human intervention. Therefore, no driver required. The vehicle can just operate independently. And so, as you can see, that part, the between level 2 and 3 is what we kind of like consider as like the very like high level of automation, starting from level 3, as I mentioned, that it doesn't require human intervention, but human drivers really need to be ready to take over the control. And so knowing this information, let me ask you, so what level is Tesla? Anybody know, or anybody could answer? Because I assume that some of people here have seen in from media, from news, or wherever that like seeing that videos, the car driving by itself, and we can give it a guess. Well, actually, the Tesla, from the experts and based on the levels of automation that I just shared, Tesla is considered as level 3. So it has that technologies, properly operating itself, that with that level, that it operates by itself. And so we see people like taking off their hands, but the serious part is that people start like reading, falling asleep, and which is not appropriate because, like I mentioned before, level 3, the drivers need to be ready to take over the control when is needed. So of course, it's pretty relatively high automation that surprises us, and it's such an amazing technology now. Yeah, like we appreciate the innovations and all that revolution, but that's such a high hope that we just anticipate when we think about autonomous vehicle, like it will just boom, like drive by itself than us, which is not the case. And so regardless of these innovation and all the revolution, we need evidence and research studies to move forward. And these are some of the examples of the research areas that have been done. And for an example, a previous study revealed that positive perceptions are associated with the acceptance of the technology. And so I wanted to introduce some of our research studies from our lab today. And we have done various of multiple projects, but I will be sharing some of the studies that I have been involved. And so as you can see, we have tested 104 older adults. And then in the next phase, we tested 106 younger and middle-aged adults, which the age varied about 18 to 64. And going back to the older adults, those were people with above 65 plus. And then next phase, we tested out additional 42 people with disabilities. And here in people with disabilities, it included people with the issues with ambulation, sensory, hearing, visual, and self-care, and independent disabilities. And so briefly going through, I'm not going to talk too much about like scientific parts because I have all the references at the very back. So if you're really interested, you can go ahead and read those manuscripts. They are all open access. So you can just simply, search the titles and you'll be able to find them. Here, I'll go through like more narratively. And so just simply, so studies, we had a pre-survey, and we have those populations ride the autonomous shuttle, and then next they have done the post-survey to understand the perceptions towards autonomous shuttle. And so we collected their perceptions, and both quantitative and qualitative. And so this is the Easy Mile Easy 10 autonomous shuttle model that was used for our study. It looks pretty cute. Seems like it came out from the Disney World. And this is how the inside of the shuttle looked like. So it's pretty fancy with, the picture on the left side is kind of like blurred, but on the right side, you can see the clear. There are seats, and you can see throughout the windows. And actually here is some like more realistic video. And so the door opens and you hop in the shuttle. There are the hand bars. And there are some monitors. There are emergency buttons and cameras and lightnings. And so, yeah, they have some of the features inside. So just wanted to briefly show you how it looks like. And so this was the route for the autonomous shuttle for the study for older adults. And so for older adults, they had to ride the autonomous shuttle in a deserted bus depot. It was a parking lot, and because it was due to the National Highway Safety Administration's regulation, because I think it was in between 2019 and 2020, there was an incident in a different state, not in Florida, but there was an incident, so that they just did not allow all autonomous shuttle or autonomous vehicle studies doing testing it on road. So this was like just like an alternative way to move forward. And so as you can see, the ride included very simple turns and stops, and the overall ride was about like a 10-minute ride. So it was a pretty, like very pretty, like simple. However, later on, when we got the approval to actually operate on road, the younger and middle-aged adults and people with disabilities were able to ride the autonomous shuttle with the route, as you can see, located in downtown Gainesville, Florida. And so, as you can see, it had like multiple turns, stops, roundabouts with other vehicles, cyclists, pedestrians, like exactly at a mixed traffic. And so the ride itself took around 20 to 25 minutes. And so sharing some of the results, we had no dropouts. So people, all participants, entire 252 participants, we had no dropouts. They all completed the study, and they didn't suffer from any of like the motion sickness. And here the sickness that we looked at were the sweaty, queasy, dizzy, and nauseous domains. And then people with disabilities expressed the increased intention to use and increased acceptance and decreased perceived barriers after riding the autonomous shuttle. And this suggests a positive shift in perceptions of the people with disabilities pertaining to these domains, showing consistent results with the recent autonomous vehicle studies that tested older and younger and middle-aged adults. And so this information may positively influence further marketing and deployment strategies from industry, making of laws by policymakers specifically toward people with disabilities, disseminating educational information by advocacy organizations for people with disabilities. And when we compare those data between people with disabilities and people without disabilities, there were no statistically significant differences between the groups, suggesting that their perceptions were pretty similar. And so the four domains that we compared before and after riding the autonomous shuttle, they're looking at the regression model. We found some interesting parts. So for the intention to use, the Americans who are optimistic perceive easy use of the autonomous shuttle and prefer not to drive, already use public transportation, or transportation challenged may adopt the autonomous shuttle. And next, for perceived barriers, need to be taken into consideration by transportation providers, policymakers, industry partners, and advocacy organizations for future deployment decisions of autonomous shuttle. And next, for well-being, further outreach are necessary to include those who are not optimistic, experience issues with ease of use, who are driving, and who are younger. And for the acceptance, industry partners and policymakers may also want to involve and plan to include members of the population who are not represented in the above mentioned cohort. So we found some, quite interesting components after we actually really did analyze the quantitative data. However, we do have some limitations. As presented earlier, the routes between the older adults and younger and middle-aged adults and people with disabilities were different. Also, under bad weather, such as lightning or like heavy rain, the shuttle did not operate. And when there were battery issues or any mechanical issues, the shuttle did not operate properly, and so the study participant had to be rescheduled. And this may have impacted, resulting in like negative perceptions toward autonomous shuttle, And then also the study was done during COVID pandemic. So we had that participant recruitment challenges. And so, we had the sampling also could have been limited, and that may be causing the bias on the results. However, we were able to have the diverse population of 252 people with and without disabilities across the lifespan. And we had that collaboration with other universities and also the team science, including the industry partners, engineers, and healthcare practitioners, and the other disciplines. And then next, some of the narrative responses that we gained from our study participants. These are just a few examples, and so more details can be found in our the full text manuscript. But after doing the qualitative data analysis, we came up with some of the themes. And so, for example, people with disabilities, um, they had both positive and negative. I mean, all themes here shown has had the positive and negative responses. And so, reading the code, for example, people with disabilities here mentioned that I felt secured. The safety operator did not have to take control over it. The shuttle moved around to avoid the obstacles was one of the positive responses. However, the negative responses included like, I'm not sure if it's perfect enough to like if it was in a busy traffic like New York or like big cities. And so for cost, same as it's shown here in the screen, and for ease of use as well. So you can see that the people have had like both positive and negative responses, regardless that we saw that positive change in our qualitative data. And so just to summarize that, even if we had seen positive perception change after riding the autonomous shuttle, the narrative responses showed some negative responses, suggesting the improvements pertaining to the autonomous shuttle. And so in addition to our research findings, I wanted to share some of the thoughts and reflections, which wrap up in a few seconds. For autonomous vehicles, a lot of improvements is required. So for example, accessibility needs to be improved, maybe like wheelchair accessible, or installing all the ramps, handrails, such as like, those accessibility issues, because it's never perfect yet. Do not have high hopes yet, because, for example, Tesla uses cameras, and what if it snows and the entire world is white? Can the camera distinguish the pave marks or all the other things, because that would just consider everything's white. So we still have a long way to go until we can expect that fully autonomous vehicles. Next, we will need the infrastructure, because maybe when all vehicles and systems and structures are autonomous, then in that case I would maybe say yes. But it's not going to happen that suddenly or immediately. So we will always have human drivers in between, and machines or the artificial intelligence, they may never be able to predict human behavior, because sometimes I'm in a good mood, I can drive safely and in a proper speed. But when I'm in anxious or depressed, or nobody knows like how human would behave. So unless the entire structures or all the vehicles are autonomous, it's hard to anticipate the fully autonomous vehicles on the road. So we have a long way to go. Policy-wise, such as ethical or liability issues and insurance issues, like who is going to be responsible for when accidents occur, or like when the vehicle crash happens. And so that needs to be solved, and coming up with 100% agreement will take very long time. And then education will always be needed, because this area of industry is just evolving so quickly. So we always need to stay updated, and just not assume and anticipate, So it's important to be realistic and not to be too optimistic nor pessimistic. And so that's what I have. It was pretty quick, and like I didn't cover the details that deeply, but again, those can be accessible through our published manuscript. And so I would like to thank you all, and I'm open to answering all the questions.
Thank you. Actually, Beth actually answered some of the questions in the chat. So this was excellent. Yes, can an autonomous vehicle get a speeding ticket? That's pretty funny. But I would think it would obey those traffic laws better than humans would, because the autonomous vehicle is not going to be concerned about whether or not it's late.
Absolutely.
So we did put a lot of information in the chat. So I encourage you to save your chat. When your chat is open, there are 3 dots at the top. If you click on them, you can save your chat. We did put the mycardoeswhat.org in the chat, as well as how you can find someone to assess your driving. So I do encourage you to save your chat. Thank you so much, Beth and Benedict, for giving us your time today. This was incredible. It's just exciting to see what can be coming out, especially how it can help folks. And I just think hope is wonderful. So I thank you so much. As always, at PMD Alliance, we have a tradition, our wave of gratitude. Thank you so much for being here today.